Chapter 10. Memories. 6 p.m. We were now at home, me sitting in front of the laptop accompanied by a glass of whiskey and a cigarette, and her somewhere in the kitchen preparing dinner. We had spent the afternoon shopping after leaving the restaurant. First, we went to a supermarket to get food, and then we stopped by some clothing stores. As she was there without any luggage, it was at that moment that I was sure she was going to stay, at least for some time longer, in the clothing store, almost to tease me. She lingered quite a while in the lingerie section, and would occasionally turn to me and ask,
"What do you think? Do I look good in this?"
The question was ridiculous. I couldn't see anything that could possibly look bad on her and dim her in some way, but I saw the naughty smile. "But why do you ask?"
"I don't know. You might not like how it looks, and I like an impartial opinion."
"Yeah, right." And we both laughed. She made a point of modeling for me almost every piece of clothing she chose, leaving all the other customers in the store envious and the few male customers delighted to have been dragged there on this day. Finally, we returned to my refuge, and we had arrived just a short time ago. She served me the whiskey and sent me to my typewriter, while she said she would devote herself to the kitchen. I prepared myself to try to describe what had happened so far with some effort, although nothing more came out than drafts, and some confused ideas that needed to be organized as much as my head. I really needed space to organize everything, and at this moment, I was savouring that space with whiskey and a cigarette. The air began to fill with aromas, some familiar, others not so much, which directly appealed to my appetite. Around 8 o'clock, she appeared at the office door wearing an apron.
"Hungry?"
"Now that you mention it."
"Come then."
And she moved away from the door, starting to take off the apron. "What did you cook?"
"Just something in the oven."
"I have an oven,"
"Yes."
she said with a laugh.
"See, there's so many things you didn't know."
The table was set glamorously. To my surprise, she noticed.
"Just because we're alone, it doesn't mean we shouldn't have some refinement, don't you think?"
"It's okay by me, I just wasn't expecting it. And can I know what you cooked?"
"Just a little something."
"You're not going to tell me, are you?"
"No."
She brought a dish with meat and vegetables, with an absolutely wonderful appearance. She served me with finesse and then served herself. Removing the dish, I got up, and when she returned, I pulled out her chair and served her wine.
"Very good. See how a little refinement can make a difference. You almost look like a gentleman."
"Almost, but let's not overdo it."
"No, of course not."
She smiled.
"I wouldn't offend you gratuitously by saying you'd resemble something like a gentleman."
Her smile was radiant, beautiful, and the meal was made in a cheerful tone, with many laughs mixed in. We talked like two good friends, and I found myself greatly enjoying her company, her obvious culture, and an unusual view of the world, even taking away everything we had talked about so far. She was an assertive woman, with confident opinions. We finished dinner, and she insisted that we should go for a coffee somewhere. Once again, we made our way back to the village. We didn't stay long in the cafe, and on the way back, not far from my refuge, she asked me to stop. We stood there in the car, in complete silence, with no light coming from civilization on a road by the sea. Without warning, she took off her clothes, standing completely naked next to me, and walked down to the beach, meeting the waves, as I had seen her do before. I stood there alone, during those minutes of absence, until I saw her return to the car. Her skin was already dry from the cold wind that was blowing, despite her hair still being wet. She shook the sand off her feet after sitting in the car, and finally closed the door, remaining there next to me in silence. I tried not to look at her. I didn't want any of my glances to be seen as disrespectful in any way. I admit, I felt uncomfortable, not knowing what to say, and the silence became heavy. Finally, she spoke.
You know when I told you that on that day I woke up?
Yes.
It's almost impossible to explain, but it's actually the only way to explain it. Adam and I already existed before. Not in the way we came to exist, but we already existed.
I finally looked at her, and her nudity, strangely, didn't disturb me. Explain it to me.
We are of the human species. We had all the tools, the capacity for realization, and yet we weren't very different from the other animals.
What do you mean?
Look at a chimpanzee. It's the animal closest to us. It is intelligent, lives in a community. What's the basic difference?
I remained silent, waiting for her answer, which didn't take long.
The difference is that for a chimpanzee, intelligence serves instinct and not the other way around. It lacks consciousness.
But a chimpanzee knows when it did something wrong, even a dog knows.
But those are learned behaviors from contact with humans. For a chimpanzee in the wild, nothing it does is wrong as long as it serves its needs or the needs of the group.
So you mean we were very intelligent chimpanzees?
Yes, more evolved for sure, with a higher level of perception, but submitting that intelligence to instinct, unconsciously.
So what changed?
Yahweh appeared, and from that primordial clay, which was prepared for it, he took hold of us and placed us shielded from the rest of the world.
I understood what she meant. The primordial clay could mean that we indeed came from the earth as a product of evolution. Or it could mean just that the species, the raw material, was there. That was the primordial clay.
I don't know what he did, or how he did it, but one day I felt that awakening, that consciousness, and the notion that the purpose of everything I was to be at the service of my intelligence and not the other way around. Nowadays, some would talk about genetic engineering, but I don't think it had anything to do with that. Of course, the world, seen from that perspective, would be completely new. Yahweh let us roam freely through the Garden of Eden. He spoke to us at length, instructed us, modified us. He was a father to us.
She looked into the distance for a while, with her gaze lost in the ocean. Her words were loaded with a sad melancholy. Longing, they were laden with longing. She continued.
Everything he did was to make us perfect. And we were. Absolutely complementary, and somewhere between us, there was a dynamic balance. And although we felt time passing, we began to realize that time didn't matter so much to us. I was truly happy during all that time, which was a long time.
What went wrong then?
As time passed, our consciousness deepened. Yahweh's goal was for us to be the genesis of something new. A beginning, a leap. With time, we and our descendants would eventually prevail because we were better. And with time, imperfect genes would disappear.
Like we suspected happened to the Neanderthal when Homo sapiens appeared.
Exactly. It was just a matter of time. And we would literally have all the time in the world. But as time went on, our natures deepened. He became more masculine, and I became more feminine.
She fell silent. I could see tears welling up in her eyes. What she was telling me had undoubtedly been something extremely painful. As for me, I awaited her continuation, and felt absolutely amazed that this woman was here sharing this with me. In this way, someone who seemed increasingly untouchable was exposing herself before me. I felt like embracing her, comforting her, although I thought that such a gesture on my part would be small in the face of the vastness of feelings coming from her and touching me.
And that's when happiness lost its solidity. He started to give in too much to his masculine side, wanting to become dominant. As you can imagine, I didn't give in. I felt equal to him, but he considered himself superior to me, thinking he should control me, and we entered into rupture. As you can imagine, I didn't conform. And I even decided to talk to Yahweh, tell him what was happening, try to make him call Adam to reason, you know.
I know.
But it was in vain. He told me I would have to be patient, that with time everything would work out, that he would have to learn to deal with his nature. I understood Yahweh. There are things we have to learn for ourselves. If they are imposed on us, we may even accept them, but somehow we will be doing something against our nature. and that leads us to be bitter, resentful. When the situation became unbearable for me, I asked Yahweh to let me leave for a while. Yahweh asked me for more patience. I promised him I would return, and that maybe the very solitude would make Adam understand. He eventually agreed. And I left.
Tears were witnesses to the pain she felt. I couldn't help it. And although my gesture seemed small, although I felt tiny beside her, I reached out and wiped the tears from one of her eyes in a gentle gesture. She looked at me, with sad eyes, laden with the pain of her memories. She leaned in and hugged me. We stayed like that for some time in silence. The position was uncomfortable for me, and she ended up cuddling up to my lap, stretched along the car seats. After a long time of cradling her in my arms, she looked at me. I smiled at her, as if in response to my smile. She reached out and caressed my face in a gesture of affection. Then softly, very softly, in an almost inaudible murmur,
"Thank you."
And she gave me the gentlest, sweetest, languid, and full kiss on the lips.